We're told constantly to become more self-aware, to examine ourselves, to understand our patterns and motivations, to watch our thoughts and analyze our behaviors. And this is generally considered to be unquestionably good, a sign of maturity and consciousness. But I want to suggest to you that there's a point at which self-awareness becomes a trap, a prison of its own making, and that too much self-consciousness can actually paralyze your ability to live spontaneously and freely. Let me explain what I mean. When you begin the journey of self-awareness, it's tremendously valuable. You start to notice patterns you were blind to before. You see how you repeat the same mistakes, how you sabotage yourself, how certain wounds from your past continue to play out in your present. This awareness creates the possibility of change, of choosing differently, of breaking free from unconscious compulsions. And this is genuinely helpful, genuinely liberating. But something peculiar happens when you go too far down this path. You become so aware of yourself, so constantly watching and analyzing your own thoughts and feelings and behaviors, that you create a split within yourself. There's the you that's living, and then there's the you that's watching, the you that's living. And then, if you're really far gone, there's the you that's watching, the you that's watching, the you that's living. You become like a series of Russian dolls, each one observing the one inside it, and somewhere in all this observation, the simple act of being alive gets lost. This is what I call the curse of the observer. When you're constantly observing yourself, constantly analyzing, constantly trying to understand and improve and optimize every aspect of your existence, you lose the capacity for spontaneity. You can't simply do anything anymore. You can't laugh without wondering why you're laughing and whether it's genuine or performative. You can't feel angry without immediately analyzing where the anger comes from and whether it's justified. You can't fall in love without dissecting every feeling and questioning every motive. Everything becomes an object of study, including yourself. And while this might make you very insightful, very psychologically sophisticated, very aware of all the mechanisms of your mind, it also makes you extraordinarily stiff, calculated, unable to flow with life as it unfolds. Think about a centipede. A centipede walks quite naturally with 100 legs coordinating perfectly without any conscious thought. But the moment the centipede becomes aware of how it walks, the moment it starts thinking about which leg should move next, it becomes paralyzed. It trips over itself. The unconscious grace is lost in the glare of consciousness. This is what happens to human beings who become too self-aware. They lose their natural grace. They become self-conscious in the most literal sense, imprisoned by their own consciousness of themselves. They can't dance without thinking about how they look dancing. They can't speak without hearing themselves speak and judging every word as it comes out. They can't simply be in a moment without immediately stepping outside that moment to observe themselves being in it. And here's where it gets really problematic. The more self-aware you become, the more you see your own conditioning, your own patterns, your own psychological mechanisms. And this creates a terrible bind, because now you're aware that everything you do, everything you think, everything you feel is conditioned by your past, by your upbringing, by your wounds, by your fears. Nothing feels spontaneous anymore. Nothing feels authentic. It all seems like just another pattern playing out, another conditioned response. So you think, well, if I'm aware of the pattern, I'll choose differently. I'll break free. But then you become aware that even this desire to break free is itself a pattern, it's self-conditioned. The very attempt to escape your conditioning is part of your conditioning. And you're caught in an infinite regress of self-observation, like standing between two mirrors and seeing your reflection reflected infinitely in both directions. This is the paralysis of overanalysis. The person who has become too self-aware stands at every fork in the road, unable to choose, because they can see too much. They can see all the possible motivations for each choice. They can see how this choice might be coming from their wound, and that choice might be coming from their fear, and every option is tainted by some psychological complexity. And so they stand there, frozen, unable to simply act. You see this in people who've been in therapy for years and years, who've read all the psychology books, who can analyze themselves brilliantly. They can tell you exactly why they do what they do. They can trace every behavior back to its origin. They can see all their defense mechanisms and coping strategies. But they can't actually live. They're so busy observing and analyzing that they've forgotten how to simply be. There's a famous Zen story about this. A student comes to the master and says, "Master, I've been studying Zen for years. I've read all the texts. I've done all the meditation. I understand now that the self is an illusion, that thoughts are just arising and passing, that I am not my mind. But Master, I still suffer. What should I do?" And the master hits him with a stick and says, "Did you think about that?" The point, you see, is that there's a kind of knowledge that comes before thinking, a kind of action that precedes analysis. When the stick hits you, you react. You don't analyze it. You don't observe yourself reacting. You just react. And there's a wisdom in that direct response, a wisdom that gets lost when everything passes through the filter of self-conscious awareness. Now, I'm not advocating for unconsciousness. I'm not saying we should be ignorant of ourselves, should never examine our motivations or understand our patterns. What I'm saying is that there's a danger in getting stuck at the level of observation, in making self-awareness itself the goal rather than a tool for living more fully. The truly wise person uses self-awareness like a skilled craftsman uses a tool. They pick it up when it's needed, and they put it down when it's not. They don't carry it around constantly, examining everything with it. They know when to observe and when to simply act. They know when to think about life and when to live it. But the person who has become too self-aware has lost this ability to put down the tool. They carry it everywhere, looking at everything through it, including themselves. And in doing so, they've created a prison of consciousness, a cage of constant observation from which there seems to be no escape. Let me tell you about another dimension of this problem. When you become very self-aware, you start to see all the ways you're performing, all the ways you're not being authentic. You notice that when you smile at someone, there's a calculation in it. When you're generous, you notice the ego that wants credit for the generosity. When you're humble, you see the pride in your humility. Everything you do seems tainted by some ulterior motive, some psychological mechanism, some lack of purity. And this creates a terrible crisis of authenticity. Because now you can't trust any of your actions, any of your feelings. Are you genuinely kind, or are you just trying to be seen as kind? Do you genuinely love this person, or are you just afraid of being alone? Are you genuinely interested in this conversation, or are you just performing interest? The more aware you become of all the possible impure motivations behind your actions, the more impossible it becomes to act at all. This is what the existentialists called bad faith, though they were talking about something slightly different. It's this terrible awareness that we're always, in some sense, acting a role, playing a part, performing a version of ourselves. And the person who becomes too self-aware gets caught in this awareness, unable to simply play the role without constant meta-awareness that they're playing a role. Think about when you're telling a story to a group of people. If you're unself-conscious, you just tell the story. You're in the flow of it, you're animated, you're present. But if you become self-aware in the middle of telling it, if you suddenly notice yourself telling the story, notice the sound of your own voice, notice how you're gesturing, notice whether people are interested or bored, the whole thing falls apart. You become stiff, artificial. The natural flow is broken by the intrusion of self-consciousness. This is what happens to the overly self-aware person, except it happens all the time, in every interaction, in every moment. They can never just be in the flow because they're always observing themselves being in the flow, and that very observation disrupts the flow. Now, here's another aspect that's worth exploring. The more self-aware you become, the more you see through the games that everyone is playing. You see through the social performances, the pretenses, the ways people are trying to impress each other or dominate each other or gain approval. And once you see through these games, you can't play them anymore with the same unconscious ease. But here's the problem. Society runs on these games. Professional life, social life, romantic life, they all involve certain performances, certain agreed-upon fictions that everyone participates in. And when you become too self-aware to play these games naturally, you find yourself increasingly unable to function in normal social settings. You're at a party, and you can see that everyone is performing. They're saying things they don't quite mean, laughing at things that aren't quite funny, pretending to be more interested than they are. And because you can see this so clearly, you can't participate in it naturally. You become awkward, strange, the person who doesn't quite fit because you've lost the ability to participate unconsciously in the collective performance. This is why overly self-aware people often become isolated, not because they're unfriendly or antisocial, but because they can't play the social games that lubricate human interaction. They've seen through the games, and once you've seen through something, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to innocent participation. There's also a kind of creative paralysis that comes with too much self-awareness. Many great artists, writers, musicians, they create from a place of unconscious flow. They don't know exactly what they're doing or why they're doing it. They're in a kind of trance, a state of absorption where the self-conscious observer temporarily disappears and something just flows through them. But the overly self-aware person can't achieve this state. They're always watching themselves create, always judging, always analyzing. Is this any good? Where is this coming from? Am I copying someone else? Is this authentic? The constant observation kills the creative flow before it can fully emerge. I've known writers who became so self-aware, so sophisticated in their understanding of literary technique and psychological depth that they could no longer write. They'd start a sentence, then immediately see all the problems with it, all the cliches, all the ways it was inadequate. The critical observer had become so strong that it strangled the creative impulse before it could take form. This is the curse of the sophisticated mind. It knows too much, sees too much, is aware of too much to simply do anything with naive enthusiasm. Everything is complicated by layers of awareness, layers of understanding, layers of self-consciousness that prevent simple, direct action. Now, you might be wondering, is there a way out of this trap? If you've become too self-aware, if you've fallen into this prison of constant observation, is there an escape? And the answer is both yes and no, because the very desire to escape is itself part of the trap. The moment you try to become less self-aware, you've just added another layer of self-consciousness. You're now aware that you're trying to be less aware, which is just more awareness. This is like the famous paradox of trying to fall asleep. The moment you try to fall asleep, you're too awake to fall asleep. The trying itself prevents the thing you're trying to achieve. In the same way, the moment you try to be more spontaneous, you've killed spontaneity. The moment you try to be more authentic, you're performing authenticity. The moment you try to stop observing yourself, you're observing yourself trying to stop observing yourself. So what's the answer? Well, in a sense, the answer is to see through the trap itself. To recognize that the observer and the observed are not really separate. The you that's watching and the you that's being watched are the same you. There aren't really multiple layers of self. There's just this one consciousness playing a game of hide and seek with itself. When you really understand this, when you see it not just intellectually but experientially, something shifts. The exhausting effort of constant self-observation begins to relax. Not because you've achieved some new state, but because you've seen through the illusion that there was a problem to solve in the first place. The centipede doesn't need to figure out how to walk again. It just needs to stop thinking about walking. And in the same way, you don't need to figure out how to be spontaneous again. You just need to see that the whole drama of observation and being observed is a kind of game you're playing with yourself, and you can stop playing it any time. But here's the final twist. Even this understanding can become another trap if you're not careful. You can become someone who's aware that they're too self-aware, who understands the trap intellectually but is still caught in it experientially. You can quote Zen masters and talk about spontaneity and non-duality while still being just as imprisoned by self-consciousness as you ever were. This is why the ancient teachers insisted that understanding must be experiential, not just intellectual. You can know all about the trap of self-awareness, you can analyze it brilliantly, you can explain it to others, and still be completely caught in it. The knowing about it is not the same as the seeing through it. The real freedom comes when self-awareness becomes so complete that it includes awareness of itself, and in that completeness, it somehow transcends itself. It's like when you become so aware of your breathing that you suddenly realize you don't need to control it, and you let it breathe itself. Or when you become so aware of your thoughts that you realize you don't need to manage them, and you let them think themselves. This is the paradox at the heart of consciousness. The solution to too much self-awareness is not less awareness, but more awareness, so much awareness that it includes awareness of awareness of awareness, until the whole structure of observer and observed collapses into simple, direct experiencing. But I want to end with a warning, because even this can become just another sophisticated trap. The mind is very clever. It can take everything I've said and turn it into a new program, a new thing to achieve. Ah, yes, I need to have awareness of awareness until it collapses into direct experiencing. Let me work on that. And we're right back where we started. Another layer of self-consciousness, another observer watching, another program to follow. The mind will endlessly create new levels of complexity, new things to be aware of, new ways to be self-conscious. Perhaps the real wisdom is simply this: be aware of yourself when awareness is called for, and forget yourself when life asks for your presence.